Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. The topic of today's discussion will be COVID 19 challenges and opportunities for the Indian economy. The Indian economy is fast settling to a new normal with Unlock 2 relaxing the night curfew timings, provision of additional domestic flights, and trains and more activities being permitted in a calibrated manner outside of containment zone. The government has progressively moved from Jaan hai to Jahan hai to Jaan bhi Jahan bhi. With the pandemic having negatively impacted countries globally, the International Monetary Fund, in its revised projections of June 2020, has predicted that the Indian economy will contract 4.5% in financial year 21, as against the optimistic forecast announced of 1.9% growth in April 2020. The reasons being cited for the revised downward forecast has been the pandemic led severe nationwide extended lockdown leading to supply chain disruptions, demand constraints, massive job losses, with unemployment numbers in India rising to 27.1% in May 2020, resulting in loss of income, lower consumption demand, and weaker consumer sentiment. The unemployment numbers, interestingly, with the opening of the Indian economy, has come down to 9.19% as of first week of July. Some economists state that it would be a V-shaped recovery, while others state that it could be a U-shaped recovery for the Indian economy at large. In response to the economy being halted abruptly in its track of economic growth, and with the viewpoint of being able to provide a kickstart to the economy on June 8, the call by the Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, for the citizens has been that India should be Atmanirbhar, self reliant, and vocal for local. There have been a number of structural reforms announced by the government, along with other measures in an effort to move the economy back on the path of economic growth. Keeping the same in mind, like I mentioned, our today's discussion will be on the challenges and opportunities for the Indian economy. Our today's esteemed panelists who will partake in this discussion are Mr. Bhutani, Mr. Mukesh Bhutani, and Dr. Shedigal. To just quickly give you a brief background, Mukesh Bhutani is the founder and managing partner of AMR Legal. With a specialization in domestic, corporate, international tax, and transfer pricing, he has over 3 decades of experience in advising multinationals and Indian conglomerates on a wide range of matters relating to FDI policy, business reorganizations, cross border tax structuring, tax controversy, and regulatory policy across a range of sectors. Mr. Bhutani is often called upon by Indian policymakers, including in particular by Niti Aayog and the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council on income tax and GST policy matters. We also have on the panel with us Dr. Jagdish Shettigar, Professor of Economics in Birla Institute of Management Technology, Greater Noida. Dr. Shettigar has been associated with BIMTech as a professor in economics since September 2007. He was a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, 1999 to 2004, as well as the National Security Advisory Board. Besides, he has also served as an independent director in the boards of MTNL and has been a member of the Board of Governors of IIT Madras. So thank you, Mr. Bhutani and Dr. Shettigar, for agreeing to be with us today. I'll start with my first question. My first question is actually to Mr. Bhutani. So, sir, in your perspective, how do you think COVID 19 has impacted the Indian economy and its various sectors with a special link to probably the business environment?
Well, thank you very much, Professor Mishra, for inviting me. And I think you summarized the situation on the economic front well, but I just wanted to add two, three aspects to it. The current challenge is largely a health challenge, which has had a cyclical impact on the economy. And more than the health, I think the economic pain is something which is felt more. One, not just because of the impact of the health crisis, but also where India stands in its economic development. First of all, we have to recognize that the latest IMF study clearly suggests that 95% of the 180 odd economies are going to experience a contraction in the calendar year 2020. So India is not isolated in any manner. So the debate here is not about the contraction of the economy, but the debate here is how much is that contraction going to be? And before I come to what the IMF talks about, let me just focus on your question as to what is the immediate impact on business. Clearly, for the first time, we are seeing supply constraints, reduction in supply of labor, material reduction in capacity utilization, depending on which industry you're talking about. And then, more importantly, the effect of that is being fed on the demand constraints as well, because suddenly you're seeing a loss of demand and revenues by the companies, causing also severe liquidity shortages, which is partly a carry forward of the earlier issue, which is a pre-COVID issue. Now, the picture that is being painted differently by different people amongst all the figures that I have looked at it, I'm just focusing on what the IMF talks about in the context of India, which is how Indian economy would be impacted, which is a 4.5% reduction in the estimates that has been released by the IMF. So that's the first important thing. I think the other impact clearly which will be felt will be on the direct tax and the indirect tax collections. This will have a straight impact on government's ability to be able to spend, wherein in this environment the cost of health and the cost of other unusual costs is likely to go up. Now, we've just gone through the first installment of tax, which is June. June historically has never been an indicative aspect of the direct tax collections of the country in particular, not just indirect tax collection, because we get a reasonable estimate only in the September and the December installment. But what is evident is that there would be a reduction overall in the tax collection targets as well. And as we get deeper into the fiscal year, which is the second quarter of the fiscal year, which started in July, and the third quarter, we will have a reasonable estimate. Now, in the middle of all this, there are two categories of businesses. One is the adversely affected businesses, the travel, tourism, hotels, media, aviation, automobiles. These are classic examples. And then there are the thriving sectors, as we call it. So there are many thriving sectors in the middle of this crisis. E-commerce, fast consumer moving goods. You can see the figures that have been announced. Sales of some of the consumer brands have gone up, so on and so forth. So I think you have to look at it collectively, business as a whole, and not in an isolated manner.
Right. So, Mr. Bhutani, now when you've talked of, so you bifurcated it one into the thriving sectors and the other sectors which have got negatively impacted, aviation, tourism, etc. And I'm sure all of us are aware that, that's going to take a little while, because only when aviation, international flights, etc. are permitted, that is when the economy can again, or that sector can particularly take off. So, my question to you is, do you think the government has undertaken adequate measures to be able to fuel up the economic growth in the country, especially with reference to GST, labor reforms, and Land Requisition Act? What is your perspective on that?
Well, I think that the government has taken several steps to be able to deal with the crisis, and I don't think that there is one size fits all situation over here. Neither are these steps taken so far are viewed as that's all the government is going to do. I mean, like in other economies, the government's attention is largely focused on many economic measures that one have been already put into place, and the one that are likely to be put in place. Now, let's look at what the government has done. Now, series of announcements did take place a few weeks back, wherein a consolidated package of 20 lakh crore was announced. This consolidated package, as the government calls it, is not really the fiscal package that typically people look at it. Let's say, for instance, if you compare this to the package of 2008 crisis, most parts of the package are to do with the liquidity push that the government wants to give. Because in this environment, what is most required is the liquidity push, and rather than a across the board reduction. So you really divide this package three ways. Number one, where government is actually cutting out a check and giving it to people. Now, this part of the package has been focused largely on citizens, which come from the marginalized class. That's one part of it. Then there are businesses, whether they are small, medium, micro, large businesses. These are the businesses that have got the liquidity push. And then there are non-fiscal measures. Non-fiscal measures would mean that the government really directly is not giving away anything, neither is it giving any liquidity push, but it is relaxing the law. Let's say, for instance, reduced rate on interest for delays in payment of taxes, relaxation in the insolvency and the bankruptcy code, also the moratorium that has been given by the RBI, which is actually the first package that has been given. To your point, insofar as the effectiveness and the efficacy of the government stimulus package is concerned, I think it's too premature for us to take stock to what extent it has succeeded in bolstering or in reviving the confidence. And there are divergent views on it. But I think we should remember two, three important aspects in mind if you look at this package. One is, what is it that India can reasonably afford in this time? Would reduction and across the board reduction in a GST rate be viable for India? Well, I don't think that it would certainly be viable. It will throw us into a completely different crisis altogether. Would a reduction in tax rates help in any manner? Well, it's just last August that there have been across the board reduction in the corporate tax rates. So that's a reform that has been undertaken. So I think you have to give a perspective to each of these measures that have been taken by the government and slice it and look at it individually as to what has the government done to push back bankruptcies, what has the government done to reduce the overall corporate tax incidence, how much maneuvering and the room that the government has towards GST reforms. I think an across the board reduction in GST, in my view, is a no-no. Yes, but there are several reforms measures before the government insofar as liberalization of the GST law is concerned. For example, collapsing the GST slab rates, making the GSTN network work more effectively, reducing the challenges with respect to the anti-profiteering authority. So I'm sure all of these reforms measures would be looked at it. From my standpoint, this is a good opportunity to look at it. Now, the last point you mentioned was on land and labor. As we know that the larger constitutional mandate for land and labor lies with the state government. We did find a mention of this when the Prime Minister very passionately spoke about the four L's, and land and labor were the two L's that he's talking about. But he seems to have largely left the implementation at the state level, one because of the constitutional mandate, and second because he wants to be seen as someone where the central government, as a part of the federal philosophy, lay down a framework for reforms in the labor and in the land area and let state governments implement it depending on their appetite and their individual situations.
So, okay. Dr. Shettigar, my question is now to you. What is your perspective? One, how has the pandemic impacted the Indian economy? And how do you think it has gone back and influenced the working of various sectors?
See, even prior to the pandemic, since 2016-17, when the economy showed a 8.3% growth rate, and since then there has been a deceleration from 8.3% to 7.4 to 7.1, the 6.1. Ultimately, in 2019 or 20, it ended up with the 4.2% when pandemic impact just started. But the nature of the slowdown till then was different as compared to the crisis we have been facing as a result of the pandemic. Because pre-pandemic crisis was basically the demand constraint. One was, of course, because of the rural crisis, and another, our external market, that is a major chunk of our external market got adversely affected. Whichever, though the US started recovering slightly, but the Eurozone or the Japan or even the China, there was a deceleration at that point of time. But after the pandemic, the nature of the problem totally got changed. Now it is not just a demand constraint, it is also the supply constraint because of the lockdown. Practically, the economy was at the standstill, except a few sectors like healthcare or the pharmaceutical or some of the essential things. Otherwise, there was a total collapse of the economy, at least till we started opening of the economy slowly. So the government has to address both from the demand side as well as the supply side. Till the pre-pandemic days, it was okay. It is a demand constraint at that time. The measures were required only from the point of view of the boosting the demand. But now, rightly, the government has tried to address both supply side as well as the demand side. Now, as far as the impact of the measures are concerned, though we are not what we call the recovered the fully, whatever the indicators are available, whether it is in terms of the consumption of the power or demand for certain items, especially the essential products or the food grains. So it all shows that we are almost what we call started recovering, though it is not fully recovered. Still, there is a what we call the shortcoming. And even if you take the automobile sector, which is one of the sector which got badly affected, now the problem in the automobile sector is that they are sitting with the booking of more than 2 million cars, which they are not in a position to supply because the recovery of the demand is faster than the recovery of the supply. Because of the what we call the lockdown, they have not been able to recover in the same rate because of the other problem also. Then uh, in addition to that, there is also problem of the migrant labor. It seems that out of 50 million migrant labor, the large chunk of the migrant laborers have left their workplace towards their villages, though some of them started coming back. So then there is also in economics what we call the demonstration effect, because often when you talk about the demand side or the aggregate demand, it is not only because of the planned demand. Often the people visit the market without planning for the buying of certain product, but they may get influenced when they look at the particular product, and they may get impressed, and at that point they may decide to buy that product. Now, that type of the demand, that is what has been described as a demonstration effect in the economics, that may not take place right now because of the fear crisis. Though there is a unlocking of the game, and it is a fairly what we call the open this thing. Still, people try to avoid visiting of the markets in order because of this fear. Now that will definitely affect the demand side. So these are the new what we call the factors affecting the economy. One, as far as the known factors are concerned, I think the government is in the right direction. And for the first time, I think the uh, when the prime minister articulated his Atmanirbhar, I think first time he mentioned the what he call the importance of the what he call the big ticket reforms like the land reforms or the labor reforms. Of course, it is not that easy, but since the government is still at what you call the second year of its the second term, so the government has got the luxury of initiating the this tough reforms both this year as well as the next year. So we have to see that all the indicators showing that we are in the recovery path, but at the same time, there are challenges. As I said, that there are unknown, I mean, the new challenges like impact of what we call the fear psychosis. So we have to take care of all these things. I'm sure that in the coming months, especially after the say the festival season, we will get what we call the idea how the economy is moving towards the normals.
Okay, so that's interesting. Mr. Budani, like Dr. Shedigar mentioned, this year and next year, considering that the government is in the second year of governance, do you think there are any tough measures, reforms that you would recommend that the government undertakes? Considering, like I mentioned, it's only in the tough second year that they are there of their governance. They still have 3 years to go.
Well, I think, when you talk about what are the tough reforms measures, we need to give a context to it. Directionally, land and labor, not just for the term of this government, not just for this government, but even for successive governments in the past, since 25 years of economic reforms have been identified as really two tough areas. We also know historically in the first term of this government, when it took on the land bill and when it took on in a very steady manner insofar as labor reforms are concerned, that there was a pushback. So I would classify these as two very tough pieces of economic reforms that need to be on the government agenda. And I have no reason to believe that it is not on the government agenda. However, to me, it seems that the government is trying to balance out the political ramifications of both these reforms because they are politically tough. It's not just about a consent for these reforms insofar as the opposition is concerned, but it's also making sure that you take the state governments on board, because without taking them on board, you will not be able to implement these reforms. Number one. Number two, even if you looked at historically GST, which I viewed as a very tough reform, I think the government did stick on to its resolve and implement it, which in my view was a very, very difficult task, not just because of the fact that it required a constitutional amendment, but it still requires state consensus, because when you are putting out for vote important issues on the GST Council, you have representation by the states as well. Another case in point of tough or radical reforms, as we call it, is in the area of agriculture trade with respect to pricing of agriculture products. So after the announcement, the mega announcement of the 20 lakh crore assignment, 20 lakh crore stimulus, we have not heard much about the amendments to the APMC, the Agriculture Marketing Produce Act, which in my view is also very radical, because that's going to do is in one shot institutionalize the entire pricing mechanism for agriculture. So that's in my view a very, very important piece of reform. I would, if I have to put on my list more from a corporate, commercial and business standpoint, I would say that there are several other steps that can be undertaken by the government. One is a very targeted way of looking at certain industries who have to be revived. Let's say, for instance, the real estate sector. Now, that's really, in my view, the toughest to deal with because of historical problems, land related issues, crisis in NBFC, availability of financing, so on and so forth. So it's a sector that requires a more wholesome approach. One, financial viability of the real estate sector, land reforms, reforms in the area of NBFC for financing. So if there is a targeted focus on a particular sector, and real estate is something that I took it as a first, then that would do well. Because bear in mind that sectors such as real estate have a cyclical impact as such on other. If there is growth in real estate sector, which right now is lying dormant, you are really looking at growth in the real economy, in the labor market, in cement, in steel, and in host of other enabling infrastructure, banks, NBFCs, consumers, everything. So that's like becomes a very, very core sector. The other forms of reform would be making improving and continuously on the ease of doing business, whether that's got to do with arbitration law, or that's got to do with looking at force majeure kind of situations in the COVID area, or it's got to do with relaxations in the M&A rules. So some parts of it are being looked at in a very, very opportunistic manner, but the larger picture is still yet to emerge. The third sector that I feel extremely positive about is the e-commerce and the technology sector. I feel that COVID is going to result in a new set of Indian startups which will drive on the innovation wave, and they will embrace new forms of technology and innovation to be able to deal with the COVID situation. I also feel optimistic that in certain areas of manufacturing, specified areas, not manufacturing as a whole, you will see greater degree of competitiveness being built up for Indian manufactured products from an export market standpoint. I also see that the whole notion of be vocal for local is going to give a different thrust altogether for Make in India program. So I do see pockets of economies or pockets of industries emerging stronger out of it. Maybe the signs are not visible today, but as you go later into the year, many of the business models are going to evolve as a result of the current pandemic situation, and many of this will start speaking out next year onwards when the economy comes back to track, which is the growth track and moving away from what we will experience as a contracting economy situation that we are hearing about it today.
Right. And I agree with you because what we read also in the newspapers that we can see there are green shoots of recovery which are there. Okay, let me now narrow it down a little. You mentioned corporate tax. So the reform happened last year with regards to corporate tax. What about direct taxes? Considering that
Well,
4.5% of the population pays income tax, do you think cutting income tax is going to boost the demand in the economy, Mr. Bhutani?
Well, good question. You're right that the last year's reforms on tax reduction was largely focused on corporate tax. So, if I put the entire space of tax reforms in perspective, insofar as rates are concerned, I think that the 22% rate clearly has come as a surprise to everyone, because that is not what people had thought of, number one. If you recall, way back in 2014, the government spoke about a 25% rate, but it never took any measures to bring the rate down. As a matter of fact, with the impact of surcharge and cesses, we were actually close to 35%. So now an across the board reduction of 22% is too good. Of course, from a government and treasury standpoint, it's just a bad time because for the first time we did see that we missed many targets for the fiscal year 1920 insofar as tax collection is concerned. But that missing of the target was largely because the economy was already showing signs of weakening, and for the first time then we saw sub 5% growth rate levels. So from a government and a treasury standpoint, that was not well timed. We should have reduced the corporate tax rate in 2017 or 2018, but nevertheless, it happened there. Now, what that has resulted in are two things. The gap between your corporate tax and personal tax has widened. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate whether you should dig deeper into the pockets of rich taxpayers, because we all know that with the super rich surcharge, the maximum rate of tax now is 42.5% for income above 5 crore. But let's look at the demand driven story that you're talking about. Yes, I certainly feel that a further reduction in tax rates for the middle class, for household income of 10 lakh or for, household income of 20 lakh or individual income of 10 lakh, it is going to make an impact. So if you actually now synthesize and calibrate the tax rates for the 10 lakh and 10 to 15 lakh category, I have no doubt in my mind that it is going to drive up the consumption and help bridge the demand gap that has got created because of the COVID-19 crisis.
Okay, Dr. Shettigar, you mentioned the problem faced by the migrants. So, interestingly, data is showing that 15 to 20,000 migrants on a daily basis have been returning to Mumbai, Delhi, etc. And if I go by the statistics, it says about 3 lakh migrants have already returned to Mumbai. So, do you think it is going to change the face of the Indian industry, and it's working?
No doubt the migrant laborers started returning, but still a large chunk of, I think the more than 50% of the migrant labor still are sticking to their villages, whether they are from UP or the Bihar or the Northeast. And maybe in the coming months, some of them may return, but I don't think the possibility of all the migrant laborers returning back to the workplaces. But this will change the economy of the country. So one good thing is that as a result of this, since the manufacturers started facing the labor shortage, suddenly the demand for the laborers has gone up. I mean, from the point of view of the manpower, it is a good sign that the return for the manpower, whether it is call it the wages or the salary, it is a likely to go up. And you also see how they are pampered. You have seen some of the people like construction firm in the Mumbai trying, arranging a chartered flight to get back the laborers back. And similarly, the farmer from Punjab trying to arrange the chartered flight to get back. This all shows that suddenly people realize the importance of the labor or the manpower in the manufacturing process. Now, other good impact is that in states like Bihar or the UP, where there was economic environment, business environment was not conducive, which actually compelled the laborers to migrate to the cities like Bangalore or the Mumbai or the Pune. Now it is an opportunity for these states to make use of the laborers remaining in their state, because as a result of some of the migrant laborers not going back to the workplaces, there is a surplus labor in the states like UP or the Bihar. The same way, like why the investors from the US or other countries started moving to the countries like the China in search of the cheap labor. And similarly, I'm sure that in the coming days, the investors will be looking for the locations where they'll be having a cheap labor. which means that the states like Bihar or the UP will provide the cheap labor. So it is an opportunity for the investors to put their investment in such states which are yet to be exploited. Unfortunately, the UP government already started initiating certain measures to attract not only the domestic investors, but also they are looking for the investors who are likely to shift from countries like the China and looking for a better uh, investment locations like the India. So it is an opportunity. So in the coming days, one, the importance of the laborers or the manpower will go up, and on the other hand, there is a likely to be balanced growth, because so far what we see the growth means it is limited to the state, I mean the western states or the southern states. And in the coming days I think that it will be balanced growth, stretching even the northeast or the northern states like the Bihar and the UP. So it is, I think it is a positive development. Only thing that the states like Bihar and the UP, they should what you call the make use of the opportunities at their doorstep.
Professor Mishra, I just wanted to make one small point, and I'm glad that Dr. Shettigar touched upon it. To your earlier question, I was focused on the tax reform being used as an avenue for boosting the demand. But we should also remember that there is a segment of the economy that's below the taxpayers, and this segment of the economy are the marginal class. So I just wanted to make mention of one more important facet which is there in this 20 lakh program, which is on the direct transfer scheme. Now, this is, in my view, a very important measure to boost consumer demand, and some of the data that's coming in is evidencing to the changes that we are experiencing in the economy. And in my view, the changes could be far more positive. So there is no doubt that these cash transfers are superior to distortive subsidies, and the Garib Kalyan package is, in my view, a case in point. In fact, if you look at it, the government has already transferred close to 40,000 crores to the bank account, which includes the 10,000 crore that has gone to the women under the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan Yojana program. But is it the ultimate solution to recovery? That only time will say. But if you look at the total account balances in the Prime Minister's Jan Dhan account, it has increased from 1,17,000 crore to 1,36,000 crores. This data is available until the end of May, which is a massive jump. And I think that recent research by some of the economists are suggesting that these Jan Dhan accounts are getting translated into over 1 crore transactions per quarter. And all of these are going to act as a fillip for demand consumption. We also have to bear in mind the psychological impact that the current set of crisis is having on the psyche of human beings to spend, whether comes from the middle class or he comes from the marginalized class. The whole psychology drives us by saying, let's save because we don't know how bad things are going to be. So as you see this health crisis receding, whether by way of discovery of a vaccine or a drug, and a fear going away, you'll have a different set of psychosis playing in human beings' mind, and completely different insofar as the way Indians look at their spending and the savings pattern, including the marginalized class. So I think I feel confident and optimistic that late into the year and into the festive time, that would be a good time to be able to test the psyche of the spenders. And that, in my view, is going to be the key for the demand side revival of the economy.
Right. And just to add to your point, because as far as even the marginalized sector is concerned, they're already providing free healthcare, Ayushman Bharat. They're already providing housing for all. Along with that, free food grains has already been given, and free food grains is obviously going to go back and boost up the demand side again. So, what do
Correct.
you, yeah, on the Okay, so due to paucity of time, I can see I just have another 5-6 minutes to go. Uh, Dr. Shedigar, what are your few recommendations that you would want to give the government with regards to handling of COVID-19's impact on the Indian economy?
One, of course, as far as the rural sector is concerned, the government has gone for a game changer. There, I just would like to correct what we call what Mr. Bhutani mentioned. They have not tried to what he called amend the APMC Act, for which, of course, they tried to encourage the states to amend the APMC Act in the very first year of the government in 2014, actually. But hardly even the Bihar has amended that act. Otherwise, the rest of the states did not have. But what the government initiated recently is that they have broken the monopoly of the APMC, as a result of which the farmers need not rely only on the mandis. They are free to sell on their own directly to the market. So this is a game changer. But here, to answer the question you raised, the government should implement the proposal to build up the rural infrastructure, like whether it is the cold chains or the refrigerated transport system, because this will help the farmers to be an effective supply force in the market, and they can command the just price their producers. And similarly, the whatever the proposals which the government come forward with, through the Prime Minister's articulation recently, like his what he called the mentioning of the land reforms or the labor reforms. I think the government should go ahead with the implementation of these policies. So if the big ticket reforms are implemented, I'm sure that we will go back to the normalcy, if not immediately, at least by the end of 2021, we will be able to go back to the normalcy. And let me also tell you though that the so-called the forecast by the so-called international agencies or the IMF or the World Bank or others, they don't have the separate data system. They just rely on our data system, and on the basis of their interaction with the sum of the expert here, they come to certain conclusion. It is not, the estimations are not based on their own what they call the data system. So we did not worry on the so-called the IMF forecast or the World Bank forecast, but it is only the government which has got the real data.
Right. And Dr. Shedigar, just to add to that, the other two ordinances that the government passed with regards to agriculture, contract manufacturing, and the amendment to the Essential Commodities Act,
Yeah.
I'm sure that will also increase income in the hands of the farmers and in turn boost demand.
Yeah, because this will balance the supply in the market. Because so far, because of the Essential Commodities Act, there used to be imbalance. There used to be surplus in certain what they call the segment, resulting in the crash of the prices. Whereas in the locations where there is a shortage of the items, there if the prices used to shoot up. Now that will get, the resolved because of the amendment of the Essential Commodities Act. So that will also help the farmers, as well as the consumers will also be benefited as a result.
Right. Mr. Bhutani, what about you? A few recommendations that you would want to give the government?
I wish there were few, but let me just focus on a couple of them. I mentioned that I'm not a fan of across the board GST cuts, and I don't think in this scenario it's likely to happen. I think income tax cuts at marginal levels, in my view, are critical. But whilst on GST, I think there's a lot of opportunity for government to push the GST reforms. I mean, I don't see any reason why it can't bring petroleum products or stamp duty or electricity duty. I mean, it should just go ahead with this reforms as a part of the GST Council. I mean, nobody likes opening the newspaper and seeing that there are 15 hikes in the state VAT and in the excise duty on petroleum products. So I think that's negative publicity, in my view, at this time for the government. Of course, as a short-term measure, it is fine. I also feel the government should continue with greater thrust the direct transfer reforms for the marginal class under the Garib Kalyan and the Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana. I covered real estate. There is scope to work around the stamp duty. NBFC reforms are long-term reforms. They can consider the payroll support to the migrant workers. Farming and agriculture reform should continue, including not just removing the barriers for pricing, but also trade barriers that exist today, in my view. And I think a little bit of opening up and easing up of interest rates to push consumer financing, because that is going to drive consumption, in my view. We also have to make sure that India stays competitive, because if you just look at the program announced, the fiscal package, it is estimated by many economists that India's debt to GDP will go up as high as 85%. Now that's alarmingly high. We have lived with those debt levels in the past as well, but it does tend to put pressure on the credit rating and the investment grade of the nation, because those are the parameters that investors look at from a foreign investment standpoint. I also feel that India should go all out to attract more foreign investment and try and remove, I won't use the word barriers, but still there are many, many glitches and roadblocks, particularly at the state government level, because we really need more foreign direct investment in these times.
Okay, Mr. Bhutani, let me be a devil's advocate. You mentioned that they should bring petroleum under the GST, but I'm sure we know the workings of it. As far as petroleum prices are concerned, only 30% is linked to the demand and supply, or the crude oil prices international. Balance is a source of revenue collection. So how do you think the government is going to manage that?
No, I think that I also mentioned that as a short-term measure to collect more taxes on petroleum is understandable, because the government has to gather resources from somewhere. You can bring petroleum products into the GST chain and still continue to tax at the higher rate, which means that you're taking away the cushion from the customers because of the low crude oil prices. What's happening today is that the consumers are saying crude oil prices are low, import FOB value of the product is low. Why am I paying high rate? But the higher rate is made up of a very complex formula, an ad valorem based excise duty, giving a handle to the state government to raise the rate as much as they can. Not all state governments have done it. Delhi has done it, and I'm not criticizing the Delhi state government for having done it. By bringing it into the GST regime, you have a standard regime across the country. Of course, a lot of the credits which get lost away because you're not in the GST regime will be available. That will make businesses more competitive, in my view.
Fair. Okay, so that's been a very interesting discussion. I'm sure that our viewers would agree that there's a lot to discuss, but due to paucity of time, I'll be forced to now close the session. Thank you, Mr. Bhutani and Dr. Shedigar, for sharing your viewpoints on today's interesting topic, and hope to be able to talk to you all soon. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Mishra.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shettigar. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.